this meeting to order. This is a special city council meeting outside of our normal schedule. I believe the agendas are available on the website if you're viewing this from home. And before we get started, as usual, we'll ask Rick to, since he has the flag, to lead us in the pledge. Everybody else can just follow along. So if everybody chimes in, nobody hears it. So.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Play ball.
All right, so we have review of the city budget with the school board first. And for this, I'm going to hand the meeting over to Mike Roy and to Eric Haley for this part.
Eric, I was hoping that you could start us off, and then I can give a summary with what you've presented as part of the overall city budget. Is that okay?
Sure. So I know we have a lot of new counselors and we have new board members as well. So these pages might not be as familiar to you as they have been to some of the veterans, but ultimately when you boil the school budget down, you end up with a budget summary expenditure and a budget summary revenue sheet. So for purposes of this meeting, I think they're the best two pages to talk about. And I want to talk about the budget summary first, and that's the page that lists all of our budgets way back to 2015-16 across the first row at the top. So if you wanted to see how a cost center, like special services, has changed over time since the 15-16, you can see where their budget has gone. You can see in the next to last column what the difference is for what they're asking in the 2021 budget from what it was in the 1920 budget. And you can see what that is as a percent increase. So this is done by cost center. So we have special services, Mitchell School, Hall School, junior high, high school, mid-main tech, adult ed, ELL are English language speakers or learners, health services, alternative education, certification. These are all cost centers that constitute the makeup of the whole budget. If you go to the budget 2020-21 column.
And someone, sorry, who sent this particular, I have like 4 separate things on my screen, but what you're describing isn't one of them. Who sent that email?
I sent out the summary expenditure and summary revenue, Nick.
It's an email, Nick, directly from Eric.
That was yesterday.
You know, I could probably bring it up on the screen.
Well, if someone could just forward it to me, it looks like it went to my mayor email box, which then did not get forwarded to me.
I'm sending it right now.
Thank you, Eric. That'll just make it easier.
I was gonna say I could show it to you.
So the next column I'm going to talk about is the budget 2020-21 column. And you can see the sum total for each cost center. And if you go to the bottom of that, you'll see 25,745,175.46. So that's what the school has landed on as a number for next year's 2021 budget. Go to the next to the last column, that's the difference. So that's an 843,647.26 increase. And that's 3.39% overall increase from the previous year. Now we flip over and say, okay, that's your expenditure side. How are you going to justify that with revenues? Where are you going to get money to help pay for that? So now I'm going over, I'm going to hold it up just so everybody can see it. I'm going over to this sheet, which is summary revenue sheet. Again, you'll have years 2015-16 all the way up to the projected 2020-21 year across the first row. under the 2020-21 budget, you can see that's the third column in from the right, that the budget that we're asking for is 25,745,175.46, which is what I just read you off the summary. So the 2 pages match, they better. That's kind of basic budgeting, is that you better start with the same number. And then the rest of these rows are all revenue sources. And so we take this down, for instance, state subsidy. We're getting 14,567,105.04. And then MMTC now gets its own state subsidy, so they're getting 2,232,820.90. And I won't read all of these down through, but one of the new ones, one of the new revenue sources is service center allocation. That's an additional revenue that we're picking up because we are a business, we are an accepted business service model. And then Educare funding, and that's the pass-through money for the 4-year-olds that Educare educates. So we have the money delivered to us from the State Department of Education, and then we pass it through to Educare because it's truly their expense, not ours, separate entity. So that's a deduct. And I won't read down through all of these unless somebody has a question about what kind of a revenue, we just put kind of very simple descriptions of what these revenues are. They're a little bit more complicated, but if anybody had questions about what actually that revenue was, we could explain it further. If you go down to about the middle of the page, and I'm looking over at the descriptors now under surplus carryover, you can see that we've put $160,000 in as an anticipated use of our carryover, of our undesignated. That's the same amount of money that we've got in this year's budget. And I will tell you from projections that Paula and I have done, it doesn't look like we'll have to use any of the 160 that we have in this year's budget. So that's good news. And that means that we can take that next 160 out of next year's and really not take any more of our undesignated fund. It'll just be flopped over from this year. And then you go all the way down to the bottom and it will tell you that we're going to be asking for, or what we would be asking for is $5,254,728.89 in taxes.
8 million.
8 million. And that is a decrease. If you look in the squared in box, the boxed in number, that is a decrease of 30,444.40. That's a decrease in local taxes. So the question, the obvious question is, how's your budget going up by 800,000, but you're asking for $30,000 less? Because of the amount of revenues that the school generates from other sources, including a very hefty return from DOE in our general purpose aid. We're about a 72% receiver, which means every dollar we spend, we get about 72 cents back from the state. Now, somebody posed me a question the other day, well, how confident are you in that state revenue, given what's going on in the state and around the country and the world right now? There is a statement that's been issued from the Department of Education that they feel that their reserves are strong enough that they will not have to ask for a curtailment in the 2021 year. They're not guaranteeing that. There's never any guarantee. The last time we got a curtailment was about 3 years ago. Well, no, it was more than that. In 2008-9, it was in that recession we had, and we got an $80,000 curtailment halfway through the year in January, I think it was. And what would we do if we get a curtailment? We have to suck it up. Or we go to the city council and ask for additional revenue and permission to spend it. I'm vehemently opposed to doing that. In a $25 million budget, there are some sacrifices that we'd have to make.
Eric, how do you feel about the sustainability of this going into the next year? Like, is there any spending that's been added that you're worried about dropping off next year when it comes to the revenues that would then
I'm
Yeah,
not,
kind of-
Nick, because we've got a safety net right now in the CARES Act for
Mhm.
next year.
Okay.
We're gonna receive $701,000. Now, there are restrictions on how that money can be used, but they're not so strict as that we can't plug holes with it. And that's one of the ways that we have been able to bring you a budget, anticipated budget for 2021 under what we asked for last year, is that we pulled some things out of the budget that we believe that we'll be able to pay for with CARES Act money next year.
Okay.
Pretty confident.
For the people at home, Eric, could you be more specific about those kinds of things that you're talking about with the, this is the CARES Act being federal money due to the pandemic crisis. Am I correct?
Correct. And what the guidance that we're receiving at this point is anything that is related to the COVID-19 pandemic is something that you could pay for with the CARES Act. So for instance, we have an air handler at one of our buildings that desperately needs to be replaced. It's not functioning properly. The air quality is terrible. We need to get it replaced. It's $45,000. We pulled that out of the maintenance budget and told Shelley Phillips, our maintenance director, that we would pay for that out of the COVID because that's an obvious need. A good air quality handler with COVID-19 in the air would be absolute necessity. Replacing carpet is another one that we feel pretty strongly COVID would be lethal. Hanging around in carpets, we want to replace it with tile so that we can clean those floors quicker. If you've ever tried to clean the rugs in your house, you think you do a good job, but they're still holding an awful lot of stuff. At least with tile, we can run floor machines over them and clean them. And that's another one we pulled out. It's about a $12,000 item. And it's a floor machine such that we could quickly clean and wax floors. So those are the kinds of things that we've adjusted our budget in anticipation of being able to use CARES Act.
Technology is another one. We could take technology, we took some technology out of the budget.
We could buy as many computers as we want to buy. That's because of the remote learning that it caused.
Get it in now.
Right.
That's exactly right. Get as much done as we can while we still can.
Well, actually, one of the things that we surveyed all the parents and all the students, and we surveyed all the teachers in regards to how did we do? What was this experience like for you? And one of the things that came across loud and clear from both teachers and parents, it's not good enough just to have a device that connects to the internet. I need to have a device that's consistent with everybody else so that when the teacher gives me directions on how to download something or how to upload something or how to save something, it's the same on my computer or my daughter's computer or my son's computer as it is on the teacher's computer. So we're looking into the possibility, and I think this would be a wonderful thing for us to be able to say, is that every single family in the Waterville Public Schools will have the same device and have connectivity to the internet in their household. It's pretty hard to pass a straight face test that you're providing all children an education when we know we have children. We have families that don't even have a device that can connect, and they're not in any kind of internet connectivity space.
Rick?
Ms. Daly, you know that I've been to several of your school board meetings, very, very
And
educational.
then Mr. Foss, you should know it's Eric, not Mr. Haley.
Well, you know,
Please.
here it is.
Mr. Haley died in 1990.
So, two questions. And being one of the non-veterans on the council, I'm going to ask the stupid questions, and please tell me if I'm in error for asking the questions. I don't see and it may be just because of the quality that I'm looking at, or it could be my glasses too. The unsolicited funds line that would show what you're carrying over. And I realize that there's a line there that says that you're gonna carry over 150,000, 160,000 from last year, and you feel pretty confident about that. What does that look like? And the reason I'm asking that is about the second question as to, I realize that you have 2 boilers that you're gonna need to replace. And with a $30,000 margin of error on a $25 million budget, I want to make sure that that is all taken care of and not a worry if those state funds shift in a negative direction for you.
Well, you don't see the undesignated fund there, Rick, because we're only using 160. So this only reflects money that we're either receiving in anticipation of the 2021 budget or expenditures that we are expecting in the 2021. That's a whole separate piece on what the undesignated is. I can tell you that we feel pretty confident that we're going to be able to, and we've already started the process at the Mitchell School, replacing 2 boilers. We had to do some asbestos removal because the liners inside these boilers used asbestos at one time. So that's an expense that we didn't anticipate. But we believe that we got a quote from Honeywell for $231,000, which would also put in a small heat mate, which is a small heater that heats hot water. Up until this point, for the last 40, 50 years, we've had to run one of the big boilers at the Mitchell School all summer just to maintain hot water. This way, we'll be able to run just that mate, what they call the mate, and it will be much, much cheaper for us. So we've got a quote on removing the actual 2 boilers and the asbestos. That is being done. We've already put the boiler mate in anticipation. And Honeywell feels pretty confident that they're going to be able to get those 2 boilers in by the end of this month.
Out of this year's budget.
And we are going to pay for it out of this year's budget.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's great news for us.
That's incredible news, Eric.
Yep.
And I'd like to obviously tell you, Eric, this is out of my going on 6 years on Waterville City Council. This is absolutely the best school budget I have been presented with. And your diligent work with all the members of this school board, is to be commended on that. So I do want to say that I appreciate seeing that bottom line figure and the rationality behind it. And again, you're looking ahead to the future for next year, which is critical, like we always expect you to do. So very good work so far.
Thank you, Sydney.
Eric, what is the $50,000 increase in the central office?
Most of it's going to be my salary increase.
What?
Superintendents are going from 75% by law of the going rate to full salary. So the vast majority of that will be a 25% increase in my salary.
I thought you said we were getting a deal when we hired you back.
You did?
Wow.
I mean, some of it's raises and, normal raises. Most everybody's getting 3%.
Rick?
I had one little question that popped in my head. Out of your budget for the 2021 season, are you adding headcount?
We're adding 2 positions, 2 half-time social workers and 1, well, we have a driver ed instructor, but we haven't found a candidate yet that we're satisfied with.
Okay.
Are you buying a car too? I assume.
Actually, no, Central Maine Motors is going to donate a car. There's a program that we can work with them. It's actually an electric car. And
Wow.
they're actually talking about helping us put in a charging station at the tech center. One of the catches is the way this program works. It's got to be donated with the idea or with the understanding that the tech center automotive can use the car for study purposes. And of course, I was all in agreement with that, as was Peter Hallen. It would be a good experience for our tech center automotive students, but at the same time, it provides us the vehicle we need for driver education at no cost to us other than the insurance.
Probably not a stick shift, huh?
No, I don't. Those days are, when I was getting my license, you had to take your test in a stick shift or else you couldn't drive a stick shift.
Yeah.
Now you can't buy one.
I can still drive one.
Eric's got a
Yep.
question.
Eric?
Eric, I've got a couple of questions. One, as I recall, we can get reimbursed for up to 2 buses a year. Are we purchasing 2 new buses in this budget?
We originally had 2 budgeted, but you have to apply and then you have to get accepted. And they have 2 rounds of bus purchasing. In the first round, we did not get any.
Okay,
So if you look at the adjustment sheet that we provided, not this last time, I think we provided that some time ago. In that adjustment sheet, you'll see a cutting of 1 bus because we know we can't get more than 1 now. Second round doesn't start until in November.
okay. My next question is, the biggest percentage jump is the transportation line. What's driving that big jump in the transportation?
Yeah, because we moved about $250,000 out of special ed and put it into transportation. We were budgeting for it in special ed and then transferring it to transportation after the budget closed. The state prefers us to budget it the other way around.
So it's just a matter of where that number lives. It's not.
That's right. It was a shift from one cost center to another cost center.
But there was a reason for that, though, Eric. The reason why we did that is because we were spending it out of special education. And the state had notified us we'd get a better return on the 279 on our subsidy if the money was actually in transportation because it was for actually transporting. So we moved all of that money from the special education budget to transportation to get a better subsidy.
Okay. And then my last question, and this came up when we had our finance committee meeting. Where did we land on who's paying for the tonnage for your trash?
It's not in our budget.
It's currently not in your budget. Mike,
No.
are you listening?
No, it's not in our budget. So that means if we had to add it to our budget, instead of the 30,000 less, it would be 13,000 less. I mean, we'd be asking for 13,000 less than we did last time, but it's not in our budget. We've not budgeted. Our budget had already been voted on when we had the finance committee meeting.
Right, but you need to take a second vote, right? You haven't done your final vote on that budget, have you?
No, we do our final vote after you vote.
I mean, I'm still of the opinion that just for transparency purposes, it should live in your budget. I mean, it's not going to affect, the money that you receive from the city. So I don't know how other councils feel about that. I mean, for the same reason, I just feel like things, it should be clear to the taxpayers where exactly that money is going. And so it makes more sense for me if it lives in your budget, but I'm certainly open to a discussion on that.
Currently, as the budget stands with the bottom line that it has now, I don't believe that includes the tonnage. So that sum would have to go up.
Exactly. That's exactly right, Joan. It does not include, that number is not included.
That's my understanding. Eric, is that correct?
That is correct. The estimate we have, based on what Mark Turner gave me for information, is that our tipping fee would be about $17,500. The information I got from a hauler of trash is that if we went to, what do they call those bins or whatever, the big bins, and they could pick those up based on a regular schedule, that the hauling would be about $18,000 a year. So Joan and Pam are exactly right. The $17,500 for the tipping fee, which, remember, we had that confusion on whether the city was going to maintain that and pay that, which was my understanding. It wasn't Mike's understanding. So now we've got to come up with $17,500 for tipping fees.
And where it would go. In other words, that bottom line of what we're asking for the city would go up by $17,500, right?
Correct. That's where we would be. We would come down on the 17.5 would be, so instead of it being 30,000, it would be 13,000 less.
I mean, I don't want to dwell on it too much, because it's not that huge of an item, but I do still feel it should live in your budget, and it's really just a matter of shifting it from being a city expense to a school expense. So in the end, it really doesn't have an effect on the tax rate. I know it maybe makes your budget look a little higher, but since that's where the money is being spent, my feeling is that's where that should live.
Which you've explained to us in the finance committee meetings, and so that's why I say you're correct. If you want that, that's the way we can do it. It just increases the amount we're asking from the city and decreases the amount less than we're receiving from the previous year's budget. So we understand that you just want it to belong where it's being spent. So that means the city our budget, we would be asking for the 1750 more for our budget from the city, and that would decrease the amount we're putting, the decrease in Mike's bottom line. He'd have to change the 30,044 to 13,944, and that would, so it's apples and oranges. However, you guys, if that's how you want to handle it, we can move that back to the school budget and just change the bottom line. But the school budget passed as it is, and that's what you're looking at. So this would have to be a change.
Yeah, and we have to not lose track of it. We have to make sure that when our budget goes to the city for its final vote, that if we're going to pay that it includes that additional 17.5.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's totally understandable, very much so.
So I guess at the end of the finance committee meeting, I thought, Mike, you were going to have a conversation with Eric, but it doesn't sound as though that conversation took place prior to this meeting. Is that a correct statement or not correct statement?
Oh, we had a conversation.
Okay.
Today.
Okay.
Well, actually, we had one, I think, the very next day, Mike.
Yes, we had one the very next day, and we resumed it today.
And any update on that? Like, what did you guys talk about? Like, if you had two meetings, like, what did you talk about? Yay and nay? Like, what were the thoughts?
Eric told me today that the amount, the 17.5, would have to come out of their budget.
And we also verified that some of the other changes, like school resource officer was 75% budgeted in the schools. So we've made those changes as well. We reflected everything other than the tipping fee right now that I'm aware of.
So the school has absorbed, I mean, not only are we coming in at 30,000 loss, we also absorbed that 75,000. So we're really coming in at $100,000 less than what we asked for in the past. And now if we're going to absorb the tipping fee, we're going to ask that the city's going to have to increase the 1750 on our budget. And that's, I think it's more than fair. I mean, we've worked as hard as we can on this budget, and I think all of the school board did a great job, and it's a very, very tight budget.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Pam, I don't disagree with you. I think that the work here is correct, but I do agree with Eric that, if that it should lie in your budget, and regardless of whether your budget goes up, the 17 or 13,000, and ours can, like it. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's all it's all pretty much the same money anyway. So, I mean, no one's going to say because we had to, account for these tipping fees that, the school board did a horrible job, doing their budget, because I don't think anybody, even with that, would even say that. I think you guys did a fantastic job, but, for, just like when you guys corrected or, moved your thing from special services to transportation to show it in a better place, that's all that we're kind of doing here. I mean, like Eric said, it's the same money, whether you ask us for X and we give you Y, it's the same. It's all going to be funded. And I don't think anybody is going to say because of this that, you guys didn't miss the mark on the budget. Not at all.
That wasn't my point. My point wasn't really that at all. My point was really that, we are, we're trying to do our share by taking on, we took on the cost of the resource officer, which we didn't anticipate. And I think I think everybody's worked really hard. That's all.
I agree 100%.
Claude, has his hand up, Nick.
Okay. But
I'm going to raise the issue that I've raised in all of the budget meetings. The school budget is heavily dependent on state funding. As Erica noted earlier, where the state's hopeful that it can maintain funding. But it looks to me like state revenues are not going to be anywhere near what state revenues would like to be. So I'm just going to point out that the schools should have a contingency in mind in case we do not receive the funding from sources like the state or the federal government, for that matter, that would support the budget that you've proposed.
Hey, Eric, that's actually a good thing just for, for folks, here and for, at home. So can you just briefly, and it's probably a very long topic, but where do the state subsidies come from? Revenue sharing comes from sales tax, things of that nature. But where do the subsidies come from that, and what would drive whether or not you receive that or not receive that? That might be a good little thing.
Yeah. First of all, the state decides how much money they can raise by taxes. They know exactly what they can raise. So on our 279, there's what they call the minimum mills. How many mills are dedicated to education? And so they look at each community to see their relative wealth. And here's how they evaluate your wealth as a community. They look at your valuation as compared to the number of school-age children that you have to educate. And they simply divide that, the number of children that you have to educate, into your total valuation. And they come up with a number, a valuation per child. I don't know what Waterville's number is, but it could be something like $150,000 of valuation per child. And so they then rank order all the communities in the state of Maine, all the towns, the cities, you're rank ordered on how wealthy you are in comparison to that ratio. Valuation to children needing a public education. So if you're, let's say, a very wealthy island community, and you have 3 children to educate, the chances of you getting much state subsidy are almost nil. They're what they call minimum receivers. They receive a certain percentage just based on the fact that everybody gets that. If, on the other hand, you are a relatively poor community, like we are, valuation-wise, and you have lots of children to educate, then you are deemed to be very poor because your valuation behind each child to educate is a much smaller number. And so you get a better return on your dollar. And some of you might remember I said earlier, we're about a 72% receiver.
71.01%.
So 71 is actually closer.
Yeah.
So we're a 71% receiver. Now, everybody complains the state isn't paying 55% of what they're supposed to pay, which is the total cost of education in the state. I always say, be careful how hard, if you live in Waterville, you push that, because they're paying 71% here. Now, granted, if they paid 55% of the total cost of education in the state, Waterville would end up being probably closer to an 80% receiver. We'd get even more money because the state would be pumping in 55% of the total cost of education. So that's kind of where they get their money, Mike. They look at valuations across the state and they know exactly how much money they generated the previous year. And then they set the minimum mills on the 279, which tells exactly how much money is going to be taken from the locals to support public education.
Now, question, you said back in 2009, I think was the last time we had a curtailment.
Yeah, 8,
You know,
9, I have to go look for sure, but I think it was 8, 9, 9, 10.
Yeah, I mean, irrelevant, but like, so based on the budget then, I mean, was there a calculation that, you know, if you were to project and just say, depending on what that curtailment was, you know, can we project, is that something that we can project? If there's a curtailment, last time it was X%, if we figured it was X% this time, maybe a little more based on the budget, is that something that we can prepare for, or do they just, how does
No,
that work?
I think that's more determined by what Claude just said, is depending on how bad the state revenues are, that curtailment could get bigger.
Yeah.
Also, how much the federal government, because there is still going to be another CARES Act, which will allot money to both the state, the counties and the communities. And they're negotiating about how much it will be. So that will also kick in that. And when the federal government does that, they prescribe a certain amount of it to go to education, which is where the first 740 came from, was for the CARES Act. But then the next CARES Act is going to be looking at more lost revenue for the states, and lost you know, that the coronavirus has caused lost revenue for Waterville. You know, you could probably, Mike, you can see on Mike's sheet that he's projected lost revenue, and the state is projecting lost revenue from, you know, sales tax. And those numbers will come into play at a certain point. And, you know, hopefully, you know, they say maybe before the end of the summer that will have been negotiated.
Yeah, I mean, that's the next big push on the federal level is so far there's been money that's bailed out businesses and corporations and all of that. But really the next big thing is to help state and local governments, which is how we pay education. It's how we pay police officers. It's how we pay a lot of municipal health workers in bigger cities and bigger states. There's a whole huge shortfall in a lot of places for these really essential things like police, fire, schools, such as that. So Congress really might need to consider throwing its next batch of money in that direction. And that could make a big difference for state and local governments.
And I know that the word on the street was, to begin with, Mitch McConnell said, no, it was never going to happen, which I'm sure everyone heard that. But he has backed down from that. And the president actually is supporting that there should be another, whatever you want to call it, CARES Act, however you want to say, and that it is actually being, I can tell you that it's actually being negotiated now. Again, I don't know how much, and you can't guarantee it, but it's something that's happening now.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate the explanations. Thanks, Eric.
Eric, did you have something?
Yeah, Eric, do you have a pain threshold where you finally say, I can only absorb so much before coming back to the council and asking for additional funding down the road? I'm trying to look, I'm trying to look 6 to 12 months down the road for our side. Is there a pain threshold there?
I can tell you that I would probably bite my fingers off before I did that. We'd work very hard to absorb that, because I know how difficult it is to come back after people have set the tax mill, they've set the rates. That's a very hard thing to do. And as a superintendent, I probably would have to be pushed and tugged and pulled by the board to do that.
And
do
just like Eric and Sid have said, I'm happy with the negative, the negative, but I'm looking at 6 to 12 down the road. And just like everybody's saying, if revenues dry up, even at the Fed level, because I don't count on CARES Acts being fully funded the way they were hoping for, where if we kind of knew where the pain threshold was, that would help us maybe get ready for it if the day came. Just thinking out loud.
Rick, what would you do though? I mean, I agree with Eric that I don't think we're going to do that. And I can't imagine the circumstance under which we would. But even if that were to be a theoretic possibility, seriously, what could you do about it now?
Well, if we knew that your pain threshold was, you would need to come in at 500,000, 750,000, whatever that number would be, then we could look at our budget and say, okay, how do we prepare for it today instead of reacting to it tomorrow? Be proactive, not reactive. Start thinking
Well,
along those long-term lines that we all know that COVID-19 is gonna do the state and the Fed and the local level, you know, just trying to plan it out.
I appreciate your concern for our budget in that regard, but I'm with Eric. I think that you just figure, I don't want to watch him bite off his fingers, but
I don't watch that either.
but I agree that it has never happened before, to the best of my knowledge, and I've been on the board for over 20 years. I don't think we've ever come back to the city under any circumstances.
When I said pain threshold, I didn't mean physical pain.
Yeah,
Just
okay,
so we're
good.
all clear.
I mean,
If you had
I'm
to
with
do
Eric.
that, Rick, I think it would be physical pain for many.
Yeah, I'm with Eric. I can't see us doing that.
So the last time it happened, just so everyone knows, what we did was we stopped all spending. Every department, every principal, every school, every building. We just stopped all spending, even things that we had already budgeted, even things we'd already approved. If textbooks hadn't been bought, they were not, then we just tried to work through it till the end of the year to live in the curtailment, and then tried to find monies the following year to cover it. I mean, that's what we did last time. So just for peace of mind.
That's a good barometer to go by.
Yeah, that's how we handled it. We just, I remember it distinctly when it came up. We just, Eric sent out a notice to all the principals, to all that all spending from that point on was cut. And then anything that had to be spent had to go back to the superintendent and to the board. And we had to really look for places to find it.
And if they have that problem, we're going to have the exact same problem.
That's true.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm aware.
Yeah, and you're going to have enough to do to deal with it on your end that you don't.
Right.
We'll have to figure it out on our end, and you guys will have enough to do figuring it out on your end, I think.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
But Rick, I appreciate your caring about it.
On the plan.
I think Claude's got something.
This is only peripherally related to the budget, Eric, but what's the prognosis for the fall for the schools? Or is that still a moving target?
Moving target.
Well, I was going to bring that up, Claude, when Rick was asking about planning for what we don't know about in regards to loss of finance. And, we are going to have a reentry team. I'm going to announce that tomorrow when I do my virtual meeting, my send-off meeting, because tomorrow's the last day for staff. We're going to talk about that, and we will have a reentry team that will make decisions in regards to what it's going to look like. But I'm not a believer that we need to rush right around right now and panic and make plans, because we don't know what August is going to look like. I think we really need to sit back and watch what's happening to the COVID pandemic as we reopen places and see whether or not it's going to be more restrictive or least restrictive. I mean, there are plans out there for athletics to start up this summer to a certain level, at least guidelines. None of that's been brought to the board at this point for their consideration. I think it's a little early. And it's certainly way too early to make any firm predictions about next fall. I think there are some things that no matter what happens with the reopening, that we're going to have to do differently. And frankly, I think remote learning is going to be a part. I don't think we're ever going to get away from remote learning at some capacity. Hopefully not 100%, but some capacity of remote learning, I think, is going to become a stable with public education. It has to.
Why?
Did you ask why, Nick?
Yeah, like in the long term, why would it have to?
Well, I think they're going to, well, in the short term, I think there will be parents and people that will be uncomfortable sending their kids to school. And we still have a responsibility to educate them. We'll have to deal with that. We'll have to be ready to deal with that. And we have to respect people's, they're just not going to be comfortable sending their kids to school.
Well, one parent called me and very emotional and talked about how frightened they were about sending their children back to the public schools, regardless of whether we opened or not. And I emblazed in my mind, the last thing she said to me is, Eric, I hope you don't leave us behind.
Yeah, I just mean, I guess when you said permanently, I mean, at some point, society is going to have to figure out how to function. Meaning, community is going to have a breaking point on what they can actually handle, and you can only put so much on teachers after so many years. And I guess that's just it seems like I understand what you're saying for next year because we're still living in the middle of this thing. But we'll see.
Nick, the thing is, we have a lot of kids or a certain number of kids who live in families where there's either an elderly person or an immunocompromised person or relative and so on and so forth. And life as a very high risk person in the midst of this is really very different than life as a not high risk person in the midst of this. When your doctor tells you, be really careful because if you get this, you're really pretty likely to get very sick and probably die. That's a very different perspective from if you get this, you might be sick for a couple of weeks, but you're going to be okay. So given that, we've got to think about our kids who are living in situations with the high risk situation that really does color how you think about what's safe to do and what's not safe to do. And we've got to meet the needs of those kids. I've already heard from one set of constituents, older parents who cannot send their kid back to school. I get that. I'm one of those high risk people myself. I get that. You're not. Oh, to be your age again.
And here's the thing, Nick.
Guys, I don't really need a lecture on it. I understand you in the short term. I'm just saying, I questioned out loud whether 10 years from now we still need to have all this. We don't even know.
I hope, Nick. I hope not 10, but I wouldn't be surprised.
So that I was thinking out loud. I don't need to get lectured by every person on the line that thinks that they're in some kind of compromised position. I get it.
I didn't mean it as a lecture. I'm sorry.
No.
Just as a high
point taken. I get it.
A whole other thing.
Mikey.
How about if we look at the budget as a summary for both city and school?
Before you jump off on that, I don't know if any other school board members wish to say anything. Could we give them a chance?
Sure.
I know we're all here, right?
Of course, can still do it.
Joe, the only thing I wanted to add to that point is that we also have to, for people who are healthcare workers, they need to go to the hospitals, to the clinics and work. So they need the schools open. So there's two sides to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really is.
True. Anybody else? Because what I'd like to do just for a second, I promise it's short. Our former board member, Julian Payne, asked me to read a little statement from him in support of our budget. And as a courtesy to a former board member, he says he's compelled to address the council and speak to them regarding the budget being presented. While no longer a board member, the budget is one that I feel I had input on. My concerns and requests were addressed, and I consequently voted to pass while I was on the board. I supported the budget then and consequently support it today. It could be dissected and debated further by the council, but coming in at $0 increase to the taxpayers is a fair deal to all parties. It's a responsible budget during the time of COVID, and I believe the schools are also well provided for with this budget. Thanks in advance, Julian Payne.
Thank you, Joan.
It's a good statement.
Thank you, Julian.
Yeah, you like the statements this week, don't you?
All right, I'm going to put the budget summary up for people to see. Hopefully, I can get this done here. Budget summary. Let's see if this works. Not yet. Okay, well, I'm sorry, I'm not being successful yet. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe this will do it. Is that on the screen for people to see or not?
It
No.
is, but it's really small, like it's a cell phone size.
It's really small. How do we make
Yeah, like
that
we're
bigger?
missing.
We're seeing
So-
an email.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
seeing something between you and Phil Bothia, it looks like.
Maybe Todd Martin.
Yeah.
That better?
No,
No.
Come on, how about this?
no.
It's good on my screen.
You were doing better with the northern lights in back of you than this.
Yeah.
All right, anyway, the
We have
budget
it.
summary, which you all have in front of you,
Yes,
Yeah.
we do.
all right, is divided into three sections. And the first block is really what the budget that was presented in early March, my budget, city only, to the council looked like. The middle block is our current year budget performance. And then the last block at the bottom, well, not the last one, but the one on the bottom is any changes that council may want to make. So when I presented the budget to the council in early March, it looked like we were going to be $220,000 less than last year. Of course, we know what happened after that. And so in looking at what next year might do to our excise and our state revenue sharing, by far, the two biggest revenue sources for the city side, I think we're going to lose 98,000 in excise compared to this year, and we're going to lose almost 800,000 in state revenue sharing. As we've gone through the budget the last few months, we've had to make a number of corrections. We talked about a couple of those tonight with tonnage, school tonnage, and school resource officer. Put all those corrections together. It made a difference of almost 155,000 to the good. Eric and the school board members came in with a budget request 30,444 less than last year. We now know that's cut in half or more with the tonnage. The use of surplus helped. So folks, as of today, we would need 249,700 in additional money or additional revenues or additional cuts to have a flat, no tax budget going forward. There are a number of ways that we can achieve that, but just let me say in the second block that you're looking at, in our current year performance, the department heads deserve a lot of credit because actually I think our spending will be 571,000 less than what the council approved for a total municipal budget. We're going to save over 500,000 in less spending than what we've been authorized.
Wow.
We think we're going to take 48,000 more in departmental revenues, not vehicle excise, not state revenue sharing. The next two numbers are the really big, those are the two big X factors. The budget performance with excise for this year, which ends June 30, and for revenue sharing. I think we're going to lose 100,000 in motor vehicle excise this year by June 30, and 200,000 in revenue sharing. We'll know those two numbers a heck of a lot better in 2 weeks from now. But even with that, those losses, I think this year budget is going to be to the good 320,000. So that helps to wipe out the 250 that we need for next year. The other thing is we did appropriate, just like the school, we appropriated an amount of surplus last year. The school amount was 160, ours was 370. I don't think we're going to need to use hardly any of that surplus that we budgeted last year. So we're going to be able to carry that forward into next year. So I think when you look at the last block on that, at least my first page, is some changes that we can make and use of additional surplus to come forward to the taxpayers with a no tax increase. Now, there's still things the council's talking about, that obviously could change that. There's still the state revenue sharing for next year. If you go back up to the top block, that's line number 4. If my projection of losing 767,000 is way off, then obviously for next year, that presents an additional problem. What I did was to peg our revenue sharing for next year at the same level as this year. Well, you might say, if we are short 200,000 in this year, how can you possibly plan on the same amount for next year? Well, our revenue sharing percent is going from 3.25 to 3.75. So our percent share is going up quite a bit. And the pie, the question is, how big is the pie going to be? And I think that we may know in 2 weeks. We'll know better by the end of June. So why don't I stop there and ask for questions, comments, anything that doesn't make sense in the summary, which I was unable to share on the screen.
You made a valiant effort, Mike.
I did. I set it up this afternoon so I'd be able to do it.
So the revenue sharing, and I know you got the council has heard me talk about it a bunch of times. In 2 weeks, why are you confident that's going to be an indicator of the rest of the fiscal year?
Well, we get our June payment next Wednesday, Rick. So, and we'll know for this current 12-month period what we have collected, because that will be the final payment in this budget year. And so we can look at what our check is next week, add it to what we've already received, and say, wow, our shortfall for this year is not 200, it's 400,000. Oh, that changes the picture. Then what does that mean for the following 12-month period? Do we expect the same kind of shortages? Well, our percent share does go to 3.75. That will help. The question is, again, how big is that pie?
So when the governor's office meets in July and August to talk about budgeting and all that good stuff, what do we anticipate coming out of that series of talks? Any revenue sharing numbers that we're going to need to be aware of?
Well, I think that's incredibly important time, because they're the forecasting group. And so I think the towns and cities have to rely on the forecasts that those people that are in the thick of it come up with. Unfortunately, though, I think that's going to be too late for our budget adoption. I think we have to make a decision well before August on what our budget is and what the mill rate's going to be. So I've been inclined to advocate taking votes on the budget sooner rather than later, but there is a good argument to wait until mid-July maybe for final vote. But even then, we won't know the forecasting in mid-July.
Well, that's why I say, I mean, we take a vote now and, you know, we're counting on the 3.2 or 3.75% revenue sharing, and revenue sharing is like usually the first one to get cut when budget crises come. So we'd really be putting a nail in our coffin, I believe, if we went a little soon, not knowing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's plenty of other places the state could cut before they go to revenue sharing. Mike, has anyone talked to Henry Beck? I mean, he's a Waterville guy. He might have some insight into some of this.
Oh, I talked with Henry last week.
Oh, good.
Yep,
Good.
absolutely.
I'm glad you have that connection.
Yep, I don't have any problem reaching him, and I don't hesitate to do it. He's, of course, still quite a bit in the dark, too, but he's the one who told me early in the spring, your May check is going to be okay. And in fact, our revenue sharing check for May was almost twice that of last May. So I don't think the effects of the pandemic had really caught up yet. But so Henry has been a good source.
Great. Glad to hear that.
Mayor.
Claude? Oh,
Yeah,
Sarah?
Sarah.
I just wanted to say I have 2 phone calls that came in, so I don't know when you want me to.
Let's hear from Claude, and then we'll hear from the phone calls.
Just as a matter of timing, when will the school know what its state share is going to be? Is that going to be in the same sort of budget discussions that revenue sharing as well?
School budget revenues are known right now, Claude. That comes in a form called the 279, and it's voted on by the legislators. So we know our revenue, what it's supposed to be. Unlike your revenue sharing is generated from the previous month's sales. Right. I didn't realize that until I researched it a little bit because I just didn't understand revenue sharing. But ours is based on the previous year's spending. So when they send us the 279, we're getting.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, but is it big enough?
Good job, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, see?
He just wanted to show he could do it.
That's it.
Thank you to whoever helped him.
Yeah.
I got no help.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron.
Sarah, did you have the questions?
Yes, I do. The first one is from Phil Bofia, and his comment or question is, during the budget season last year, after the city voted, the school came up with some surplus money that was not presented to the city. Is this year going to be another year where there's going to be another case where the surplus money appears in the budget after the city votes on the budget?
Eric?
Well, I'm guessing that what Mr. Bofia is talking about is the end of year, what you have left over on the expenditure side and what you've brought in on the revenue side. And hopefully, if you've had a good year, you brought in more revenue than you anticipated and you spent less than you expected. And so I'm guessing that's what he's talking about because we did have a surplus last year, just as Mike is talking about on the city side.
And my next one is from Michael Mosley. And his question is, he would like the mayor to explain the statement from yesterday asking for more money for the police department. Where do you think you are going to get the money, and how, after a shooting, a racially motivated and Black Lives Matter event can not be taken as a threat?
Sure. Actually, I appreciate the question. I'm glad it came up. So thank you for sending that question in. We were actually meeting back in March after there was a shooting. Shooter was actually white, where the little girl got shot here in Waterville. Myself, Councilors Thomas, Morris, and Mike Roy, and Chief Massey met to have this discussion. So that's how far back these discussions go. It wasn't really started yesterday. I think when I look at how stretched our police are right now, and yesterday, this more recent crime and seeing how our police resources continue to stretch brought it up. Timing may not have been best, and I can understand how it would be interpreted that way, but it certainly shouldn't be. And the chief has actually explained to us back in March that he would like to have a couple additional officers on the force, both to alleviate the stress and also to help have more of a presence in some of those areas. And I don't want to speak for you, Chief, so I'll try to keep it 30,000 foot level here. In some of those areas where we know we have more crime. One of the conversations we had at the time was, I know Councilor Thomas and myself both are firm believers of having more resource officers, where you have officers that are actually on the ground in neighborhoods, talking to people, meeting people, building trust. I'd love to get our staffing at the police force high enough where we can do more of that, because frankly, I think a crime deterrent is better than policing after the fact. I don't think we're there yet, at least from my conversations with the chief, but I'd like to get us started in the right direction. And I certainly don't have an answer right off the top of my head because I understand where taxes are right now. But I would like to, when we meet with the finance committee next, to be able to work on some kind of proposal, both with the chief and with the finance committee, to come back to the council with some kind of proposal to show how we can start moving in that direction. One thing I'll say, looking at Mike Roy's summary, where it has a potential for a one less dispatcher, I don't think we should do that. And part of that is because that's being paid for out of the increased dispatch fees, which actually having that person there allows us to provide the service, to continue to add other departments to our dispatch service. But yeah, great question. And if it was taken that way, certainly it shouldn't be. This was a conversation that goes back to March. And I want to say too, that the Waterville Police Department is frankly one of the most progressive and upstanding police departments, most professional departments in the area. I think 99% of the people who would interact with them would tell you that, and I certainly have an appreciation for them. And I'm trying to go by the chief's lead of trying to give him the resources he needs. So, this is Waterville, Maine, and I think it's going to be important for all of us, the council, myself. The world's pretty crazy right now. We have COVID-19. We have a really what's going to be a very contested presidential election coming up. We have the protests going on, a lot of national issues. We need to make sure that we're all working together and talking to each other to make sure that we're focused on Waterville issues, and that while we can be out in the community talking about those issues, when we're working with our department heads and looking at issues here, we're kind of that steady ship that's keeping the focus on the city of Waterville, and what our particular issues are. My concern when I look over the last year and I see the police, we've worked hard to basically not increase funding to our departments for years, remembering that both police and fire were cut during the financial crisis, and most of that funding never went back to those departments after the financial crisis. I mean, so they've been working both those departments have been working in a kind of impaired capacity for a very long time. And when you see the effects of that going out into the community, and you're talking to the police chief, and you're seeing some of these things, a far more detrimental effect than trying to figure out how we work this in the budget would be to have people in our community feel like we can't keep them safe. Because at that point, you have people fleeing from the city, and more of those elements come into these. And we should include other things too, like looking at these short-term rental places. I mean, there's a lot of things, including, whether it's resource officers, looking at some of these places where crime tends to happen. But long answer, but pretty deep question. Appreciate the question, but I think I explained it all. If not, please call back in. I'm happy, or send me an email. I'm happy to discuss this with anybody.
Can I just piggyback on that really quick, Mayor?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know the mayor mentioned that conversation goes back to March, but honestly, for me, it goes back to 2011. Because this is something that I've been hearing for a long time from the South End. There used to be a resource officer down there. I think he split time between there and the schools. And that position was cut through the financial crisis. And for a long time, the neighborhood has been advocating to get that position back. I'm not sure that if we did end up adding another officer, that they would be necessarily dedicated to that. But I do think it's a legitimate discussion. I understand how people might, because of the timing, they might have taken things the wrong way. But I do want to say this is an ongoing discussion. It's a legitimate discussion. And there are many things that go along with supporting the police department. There's mental health services, substance abuse services, and those sorts of things. And those are going to be part of the discussion as well. I don't think, adding another officer or two is not a silver bullet. These situations are very complicated. But I do want to say this is a conversation that's been going on as long as I've been involved in city government. My position has always been that the police department is understaffed, and I think we need to have that discussion, and I'm sure we'll get into it as we further our budget discussions.
Thanks, Eric.
Mayor, I do have another phone call that came in that relates to the police department.
Okay.
It's a comment from Kathy Weeks. She said, we definitely need to increase police staff whatever area needs to be cut. Chief Massey needs more staff. This happened way before the protest.
Right. And just, I can't see everybody's faces while Mike's screen is up. So
Yeah.
if anyone's hands up, just speak up.
Yeah.
Oh, Sid, there you are. I see you now again.
Yeah, I want to speak to that too. And I'm all for Chief Massey having an officer and of course the dispatch position that we've been talking about that was on the chopping block. I think it should be renewed to include that instead of making it a minus cut. I think it should be added back in. And again, we can have more of these discussions as we get into the other questions with bonding and doing some different things and seeing, obviously, if we're projecting, over $300,000 to the good, that's an avenue that we can take in looking at other positions. But I want to be very clear about having a flat budget with and providing a stimulus with this COVID-19 in the city of Waterville that people do not have a rise in their tax mill rate. If we can add an officer, if we should also look at, the dispatch position, but I also think we should look at other things as well. The fire department needs another firefighter. The public works and Parks and Rec need that shared position. If you think about what happened in the winter last year, with all the breakdowns of equipment and the many of the roads not getting plowed for hours on end, and because they had sick personnel or personnel out, we have to take all of these things into consideration. So I think we really have to do some more reviewing and seeing the possibilities where we can provide additional personnel in some of these departments that are sorely needed.
Nick, I have to interrupt you. Chad, are we still streaming? I'm getting reports that we've lost the stream.
Back on. I just got a note that it's back on.
Oh, good.
Okay. Yeah, so, and let me just say, and this is the only other thing I'll say. In a perfect world, I wish I could give the chief like 10 more people and they could be out just walking the beat. And Chief knows this. I've said this for years. I'd love to have beat cops in every neighborhood. I'm a firm believer that when you have police who are on the ground, who are talking to people and they get to know the residents and they build that trust, there's a much better chance to have that relationship to know what's going on. But if we can't even get them started in that direction, so I know there's a lot, there was some great comments yesterday actually about kind of moving towards, including things like resource officers. But right now it's like and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, I think right now it's just trying to alleviate some of the overstrain but it would be great to have, and maybe it's a committee, and as much as I can't stand committees, I think good ideas go there to die.
We definitely should have more of a conversation.
Yeah, like some kind of like long-term planning to figure with, that includes the chief, and includes the police department and the community to say, how do we move in this right direction? Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure people feel safe living here, and that and like I said, I think Eric mentioned it well. There's a whole host of other issues that should be discussed too. I'm just trying to get the conversation going and get us going.
The chief is still on there? Yeah.
Flavia, you want to say something? You're on mute.
Yeah, I did wanted to mention something on that. So like, I do agree moving the right direction is the right thing at this time, especially what's going on. But I also agree that the timing of the message didn't make sense. Like, I am all support of helping the police department and going forward, but the timing didn't work. The timing right now doesn't work for that. And I feel like what it created a division against the police department in Waterville, and something so peacefully we've been doing. We had very peaceful protests. We had 3 peaceful protests, and it's taken away from that. Like, now we're going to create this division at this time. I feel like at this time, this wasn't needed.
Yeah.
Okay. I disagree because I think that actually this is a compliment to the fact that the chief and local chiefs were a part of that peaceful process. And like I sent an email out over the weekend complimenting both the protesters and all of the first responders that were involved in that. Yeah, look, I mean, again, like this is Waterville, Maine, and I'm going to advocate for what I think is best in Waterville. And the reality is 90+% of the reaction I had to it was frankly positive. I think the majority of people understand where we are and understand the Waterville Police Department. So I'm sorry if you felt that way, but we'll have to agree to disagree. You know, I'm going to always advocate. Go ahead, Meg, sorry.
I just want to piggyback on Flavia's comments. I received 56 emails today, really upset by your post. And so I do think we need to have more information, have more research done to kind of support your position. Did it?
Great.
Okay.
We have to remember we're in hunker down mode right now, budget wise, operational wise, school wise, everything's in hunker down mode. We don't know where we're going to have where the money's going to come from to support our budget. Nevertheless, I think this is an opportunity to stop and start to look at things globally. Let's get some long-term plans together, how we're going to have a great fire department, have a great police department, how can we address the concerns that are coming up in the community. But at this point, it's mostly going to be a matter of coming up with ideas because who knows where the money's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. This is definitely a conversation that needs to be had. And, you know, I think it's a very important conversation, you know, both for now and for, you know, our long-term planning. You know, we talk about it in the finance committee, you know, again, when we talk about bonding and, you know, pacing those out and not having those huge spikes, again, it's that same preparation and, okay, let's go ahead and plan for as things come down the road that, you know, we have the adequate staff for them. And, you know, we're able to maintain them as well as we build them and keep them, you know, in pristine condition. So I think we're all in agreement that we need to have the conversation. And I think it's a good place to start. I would like to go back to the budget summary though. And I just had a couple questions from Mike with regard to the reduction in the vehicle excise revenue, the projected revenue. Now, I'm assuming this is from July 1 through June 30 for next year. Is that you're anticipating? And is that because, are you anticipating that because of the lack of sales in new cars, or like, has there been any, I guess my question is that, so we started in this pandemic and, you know, the governor said, okay, we're going to hold off on having to register your vehicle until this is over, which I believe now is, you know, I think there's a date now of July 15th is when you need to have your car registered. So I guess my question is there guidance so that says, okay, my car was due to be registered in April. Is this being retroed back from April to next April, and then I'm going to have to register again? So now I'm registering my car for April of 2020 in the 2020 fiscal year, but I'm doing it on July 15th, which would, if we adopted, would be the 2021 fiscal year. And then I'm going to register my car again in April of 2021. So now I'm going to pay excise tax 2 times in the fiscal year. Is that how that works, or how is that working?
if you delayed your April registration until July, I believe your next year registration would go, your registration would go until July the following year. You wouldn't be back to April, you'd be in July.
So basically,
That's true.
if,
Wait, is that a
right,
new?
yeah,
Let's be careful what we're saying.
Because that's never worked that way before.
Right, I
yeah,
don't
like
want
if I register, if my car's due in February and I register it in March or April, it goes back to February and I got to register it again in February.
they just give you the year sticker.
Right.
So let me just try to answer the excise thing first, Mike.
Yeah.
I think
We're going to have to record the excise when we receive them, the excise revenues when we receive them. So even though the excise revenue for your vehicle should have been in this current year, if you pay it in July, it's going to be recorded in the next year. So the drop in excise for next year is really due to the fact that we think there'll be fewer people buying new cars. People who have cars are going to have them registered at some point. So we're not going to lose those kind of revenues. They just might be recorded in a different year. But we don't think there's going to be as many people buying new. So that will be a hit.
But so you're talking about a $98,000 hit, and so it's the anticipation that reduction in the new car sales that won't get picked up by the fact that there's going to be a pocket of people, right? So people from like mid-February to July, which will have to register their cars 2 times in the next fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
So like which was money, I mean, I guess it kind of offset because we take the loss in the 2019-2020 budget, but again, we should see a bump. I would anticipate seeing a bump because those folks that did not choose to register their car and took advantage of the fact that they could wait, which is fantastic. They're now going to have to register their car before July 15th, and then potentially, again in February or in March or in April. Right. And you know what I'm saying? So we would almost get, double, if my normal excise tax was $250 and I pay that, I was supposed to pay that in March, I pay it in July, and then I pay it again in March, another $250. We've just simply now got an additional $250 that didn't come in last year. Yeah. Unless I'm totally missing something, but I'm just trying to figure that out.
Well, I came up with a $98,245 reduction by taking 5% off what we expect to receive this year. And that 5% estimate came from a survey done by town and city managers over quite a wide area. And people each gave their thoughts as to how much we should look at for reduction for next year. So there's no crystal ball. There's nothing real solid to look at. We came up amongst ourselves with an expected drop. So 5% that's the 98,245 drop. I can't explain it any different than that.
Nope, that's fine. Thank you.
And the revenue sharing, Mike, well, I think we'll know that a lot better in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Looking forward.
Mike, do we want to ask the school people if they want to, or at least let them know if they want to go? They probably can.
Yeah,
You're welcome to stay. I just don't want anyone to feel obligated to say.
We still have to get into our regular meeting agenda too,
Yeah,
right?
correct.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks,
Thank you for
guys.
adjourning
Thank
it.
you all.
Very much.
Thank you guys.
Appreciate it,
Great
guys.
job.
Bye.
Thank you.
Now, the 3 items, I know we wanted to try to limit the items for tonight's meeting, but the 3 items under unfinished business all kind of have an urgency to them somewhat. Well, the first 2 items are about applying for CARES Act money, both for the airport and for the police department. And as soon as we can get our requests in, the sooner we'll get that money. Hopefully it can be recorded in this fiscal year. So we didn't want to wait till next Tuesday to get the final approval because both of those take a second vote. So those are the first two items.
All right, want to just move on to the regular agenda right now?
Mayor, if I could, we did have a phone call come in about a couple of questions ago. I don't know if you want me to wait or.
Is it in regards to the budget?
No, it's about the protest.
Okay.
Well, maybe that should wait till the end of the meeting
Okay.
under other business.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like we might as well get it over with.
Yeah.
I'm kind of with Eric.
Okay.
Okay. It's from Justin Selmer. The mayor stated that some of the issues were COVID and protest. He never mentioned the events leading up to the protest or racism. So I'm curious, is the issue the protest or racism for the city of Waterville?
No. When I brought up the protest, I don't mean that there is an issue for the city. I just mean that issues that are at the forefront, I guess I should say, causing the protests, like the larger conversations about racism, along with people being at home and things like that. I don't remember necessarily the context of that, when I said that, but I guess I was talking about all of this. There's a lot of strain and stress out there on our residents, both from them being cooped up at home, plus there's a lot of, I think, emotional anxiety surrounding a lot of these issues. And that was, I believe that was the context that was in. So maybe I didn't say it correctly, but I guess that would be what I meant. Was that it?
Was there another question, Sarah?
Nope, that was it. Thank you.
Okay.
Moving on to unfinished business. We have order 119/2020.
Can I make a motion to take all three of the items under unfinished business by title only?
Second that.
Can I get a roll call on that, Sarah?
Counselor Morris,
Yes.
Counselor Olivera,
Yes.
Counselor Smith,
Yes.
Counselor Mayo,
Yes.
Counselor Foss,
Yes.
Counselor Frankie,
Yes.
Counselor Thomas.
Yes.
Vote is 7 in favor, 0 opposed. In order providing for acceptance and appropriation of fiscal year 2020 coronavirus emergency supplemental funding grant.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll take a roll call.
Counselor Morris,
Yes.
Counselor Olivera,
Yes.
Counselor Smith,
Yes.
Counselor Mayo,
Yes.
Counselor Foss,
Yes.
Counselor Frankie,
Yes.
Counselor Thomas.
Yes.
Vote is 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
Next is order 120/2020.
In order providing for acceptance of a grant for airport operations.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Discussion. Take a roll call, please.
Counselor Morris,
Yes.
Counselor Olivera,
Yes.
Counselor Smith,
Yes.
Counselor Mayo,
Yes.
Counselor Foss,
Yes.
Counselor Frankie,
Yes.
Counselor Thomas.
Yes.
Vote is 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
Next is order 129/2020.
In order providing for approval of a lease option for solar facility.
Motion to adopt.
And second.
Discussion. Roll call, please.
Counselor Morris,
Yes.
Counselor Olivera,
Yes.
Counselor Smith,
Yes.
Counselor Mayo,
Yes.
Counselor Foss,
Yes.
Counselor Frankie,
Yes.
Counselor Thomas.
Yes.
Vote is 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
All right. New business resolution 131/2020.
A resolution providing for recognition of June as Main Pride Month. Be it resolved by the Waterville City Council acting as the municipal officers that the city of Waterville strives to be a community that is welcoming and supportive of all of its members regardless of race, gender, age, sexual orientation, and expression. And Waterville supports the legal non-discrimination protections from LGBTQ Mainers passed in 2005 as one of only 20 states in the nation to include protections for discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression in employment, housing, education, credit, and public accommodations. And the Maine Pride Month is an opportunity to recognize hard work and be supportive of the thriving Waterville LGBTQ community in fighting for their rights and acceptance and acknowledge the ongoing work of the citizens of Waterville to advocate for equal rights. And the City of Waterville thanks the Health Equity Alliance and all their volunteers and sponsors in the community for working incredibly hard to make Waterville an engaging and sustainable Maine Pride community. Now, before the Waterville City Council does hereby recognize June as Maine Pride Month.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Any discussion? I will take a roll. Oh,
Councilor Morris.
Councilor Blair.
Yeah, I just want to commend for the resolution of this, the compromise that they actually did with them. But I feel like as a community that next year, I feel like we can do better. I feel like it wasn't much of an ask, and I feel that they definitely got a compromise on this. So I believe that it should be a bookmark for next year for us to do better.
Eric?
First of all, I want to apologize to, it was Brian Evans who reached out to us. And he had sent us an email on, I believe, May 22nd. And I don't know what everyone else has going on in their life, but the email, I didn't respond immediately. And then I kind of slipped to the back of my mind until he contacted me again. And it sort of slipped my mind. And I think, I really wish I had been more prompt in responding to him. And I certainly don't want him to feel like he was being ignored. And I'm glad that we were able to deal with the issue and come to a solution that I think hopefully everybody can live with. And there's going to be a very visible recognition of Pride Month over Main Street. And I fully support this resolution. And I think it's important that the council publicly expresses their support for Pride Month.
Councilor Mayhew?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about the discussion and the dialogue in the background, obviously, like Eric just mentioned. And I think it was a very adequate compromise and reasonable compromise. I do believe that, like all special events or special recognition or anything that involves with these types of things that traditionally we have done different festivals and different things with the banners across Main Street. And I think that's the most applicable place to have that. I do think we get into some different waters if you're looking at raising different flags in front of City Hall or around City Hall, because then you get into some different other discussions and topics. I do believe that this City Council has been very supportive of this whole thing with recognizing Maine Pride, and I do believe that we continue to do that as a unit, and I think moving forward, this was a very rational compromise, and I don't even really consider it a compromise, because I really think everything has been reasonably taken care of as far as advertisement and exposure.
I don't think there should even be a compromise to be recognized by the city. Next year, we can definitely do better before June 1st.
Anybody else? All right, I'll take a roll call, please.
Councilor Morris?
Yes.
Councilor Oliveira?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Councilor Mayo?
Yes.
Councilor Foss?
No.
Councilor Frankie?
Yes.
Councilor Thomas?
Yes.
Vote is 6 in favor, 1 opposed.
Mr. Mayor?
And so we have, I'd like to make a motion to waive cloture. Is there a resolution number, Sarah?
Yes, resolution 132.
To add resolution 132, which is an item to expand the area that we've allowed the Lions Den to use for outdoor dining.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
A resolution providing for.
Wait.
Yeah, I think we need to vote on the waiving cloture.
Cloture.
Yeah.
Okay.
Need a roll call on that.
Counselor Morris,
Yes.
Counselor Olivera,
Yes.
Counselor Smith,
Yes.
Counselor Mayu,
Yes.
Counselor Foss,
Yes.
Counselor Frankie,
No,
Counselor Thomas.
Yes.
Vote is 6 in favor, 1 opposed.
Like, does that have to be unanimous, Mike, or does it just have to be a supermajority?
I thought it was 2/3. I'm pretty sure it's 2/3.
I thought it
While
was
you
2/3.
continue to talk, I'm going to look it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
You might as well go ahead and read it, Sarah.
Yeah.
Okay. A resolution providing for authorizing extension of an outdoor dining permit to Lions Den Tavern. Be it resolved by Waterville City Council acting as the municipal officers as follows. That the City Council hereby authorizes the Lions Den Tavern to approve their original permit, approved May 12, 2020, to allow the use of the entire Haynes Park.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Discussion.
Mayor, do we want to wait for the official good to
Probably.
go? Just thinking out loud here, that's all.
I guess I would just say that Jennifer had wanted us to waive cloture and add this to the meeting last week because we had some issues where people perhaps didn't get to express their concerns before some of the other things we passed. I asked for her to wait until this week, and then I made it very clear at the end of last week's meeting that I wanted this on the agenda, and so it was out there in the public that this would be on the agenda. And Jennifer followed up with an email. It ended up not being on the agenda, which I think was an administrative oversight, and I don't think Jennifer should be penalized for that. And so I'm glad that the council is willing to take this up this week, of course, depending on whether we needed it to be unanimous or not.
Well, I mean, I think last week we made it pretty clear. I mean, several counselors have made it, reach out to us if there's something that we can do to help your business. And this is the first thing that's happened for that. And I'm not sure why that's not unanimous, but okay, let's wait for the.
And I would say, I did ask Sarah whether anyone else has made any inquiries to see if anyone else is interested in this space. And to this point, we've had no other inquiries about using that space.
No, and Kevin decided to do some other
Are
things.
we in the discussion phase of this? I hate to be the stickler for the details of how this thing runs, but
yes,
feels like we're in the discussion phase of a vote that may or may not happen, which doesn't seem right to me.
I think we're trying to save time.
I think Mike's going to find that it's 2/3. So I don't think we're on unsolid ground right here.
I believe so. I'm still looking. I haven't found it. I'm going to make one more pass through the section of the charter where it should be. So I believe it is 2/3.
Unfortunately, we don't have Bill Lee here to pop it up off the top of his head in his inimitable way.
Well, we won't ask him to put it on the screen. But.
Remember when we had Ed Lockowitz, by the way back? The guy knew every Robert's rule.
He did.
So,
I have the book right here. It's just like that thick. So
how about if I
no finding on
briefly give you my issue is a matter of favored treatment. Is there anything that we're going to be able to do for the rest of the merchants downtown before we give Jennifer a second dip at in the bucket? we haven't had much time since our last meeting for merchants to respond. And so while I appreciate that we want to move as quickly as we can for merchants, I want to make sure that everybody gets a fair shot.
Sid has his hand raised, Nick, if you can.
Is it all right to discuss this stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
you know my point on this, being in the industry, and Claude, I not understanding your position on this when more than 50% of your district is the commercial district of the city. The fact of the matter is the hospitality industry has been taking frontline hit for this COVID-19. And the fact of the actions that we did last council meeting with some of our hospitality merchants spells out that we're willing to do whatever we possibly can to give them assistance outside of the state. And these people need patrons. These people need revenue. These people have profit and loss statements. And to be frank and honest, this piece of land in the concourse is nothing but a blight on the city. It's never been used for anything. It looks like heck, and it's nothing but overgrown weeds. And to put that into perspective, you know, to utilize this to help a merchant out to stay sustainable and to stay in business, to me, that's the top priority. And we should be thinking about that as paramount priority.
Right.
So that's where
I think in Claude's defense, I think his question was really like, were there other merchants who wanted that space? I think that, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah,
I think that's where you were going with that.
Yeah,
exactly. Or is there other space that that we can create for other merchants, you know, that would help them out? I'm absolutely 100% with you, Sydney, in terms of the city doing whatever it can to get the merchants back on their feet. But let's think about all of the merchants and not just the squeaky wheel.
The only thing, yeah, well, and the only thing I will say is that the, I mean, clearly, you know who's. I've talked to Kevin. He doesn't want that space. I know Holy Cannolis there, and to my knowledge, they haven't requested any space. So that's the only thing I would wonder is if, I mean, at this point, everybody's requested outdoor space.
Yep, and I'm sorry, I cannot find in the charter where that provision is. I think we need to go with the 2/3.
So I just found, well, Rian just called in and he said regarding the Lion's Den, a non-unanimous means that it will take effect 21 days after passage. But I did find that it does need to have a unanimous vote.
I'm sorry?
It does
Sarah?
need to be a unanimous vote if it's an emergency ordinance or order.
It's not an emergency, it's a waiver of closure.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
A
not
resolution.
It's not an emergency. It's just waiving cloture.
It's a normal routine business.
Yeah, it's a resolution. There's no 21-day waiting period.
I mean, I say we proceed, and if we find out after the meeting that we were wrong, then we were wrong, and we'll deal with it next week.
Not that we haven't been there before.
Can I respond to Council Frankie on that thing?
Rick Foss has had his hand raised quite a bit.
I would like to add on to Holy Cannoli, Lion's Den, and you know who's. So Claude, just to remind you, we voted to give you know who's the 3 spaces plus the island area down there next to the Lion's Den section. I've been in constant contact with January at Holy Cannoli, and her only interest is that she wants to put 2 tables just outside of her door, as long as she's in the ordinance for the 3-foot rule on the sidewalk. As long as she's good to go there, she's happy as a clam right now. Today, I happened to be in the Lion's Den talking with Erica Pilot. The overflow that she's experiencing, with the growth that she's experiencing, even in COVID-19, is sitting on the sidewalk. And this expanded space would get those patrons that are waiting in line into her area on the island, the park. So I'm excited that she's excited that her growth potential is skyrocketing. It's bringing a lot of eyes to the downtown. And I think in this time that we're in right now, I think it's awesome. So as long as I see a bunch of heads looking for cloture stuff, as long as this goes, this is a great, I think a great thing for the downtown with Erica and Jen really leading a charge down there and developing maybe a brand new way of life of how the restaurant and bar business does what they do. You know, obviously that's going to be up to everybody at this council for how we go forward, but I think it's great. I'm excited.
Okay, are we ready for a roll call? I'll take a roll call. Oh, Councilor Frankie?
One question, is it, are we just voting on expansion of the area, or are we considering a change in the limits on live music?
Just the expansion of the area.
Right.
Counselor Morris,
Yes.
Counselor Olivera,
Yes.
Counselor Smith,
Yes.
Counselor Mayu,
Yes.
Counselor Foss,
Yes.
Counselor Frankie,
Not because I'm opposed to outside downing, but because I think we're procedurally deficient. I'm going to vote no.
Counselor Thomas.
Yes.
Vote is 6 in favor, 1 opposed.
All right.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
could I suggest for the next piece, it's getting close to 9 o'clock,
Yep.
that maybe we look at one item that is at the bottom of your agenda. We have debt service, bond issue, and a discussion about a budget adoption schedule. And maybe we just look at the list of proposed bond items, just so everybody can get familiar. We're not asking for any votes tonight, but if we can look at those bond items and have a beginning discussion, it's not the end of the discussion by any means. Let me make sure I got the right screen here. Does that come up on people's screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So if that's all right, what we have are 5 different city departments that have been asking for help for equipment or other needs: airport, police, public works, parks and rec, and fire. Those departments all asked for more than what I'm recommending. So you can see in the second column, the manager request. How did I come up with those numbers? There's no scientific formula that I used. I just tried to keep the bottom line reasonable. And if you ask me what reasonable is for an amount, I can't tell you. I guess I was trying to keep it in the $4 million range. And that's where we're at. Total requests is 3.9. So some of the department heads I know are listening in if you have questions of them. So I'm not sure if we should just open it up to questions now rather than have me talk any further. Maybe people want to start by asking questions about the different numbers.
Mayor, maybe before you guys start that, I did have a phone call come in from the June Pride month. It was a question and comment.
Okay.
It's from Brian Evans. And he asks, are you going to post to the Facebook page regarding the proclamation of Central Maine Pride? He would also like to thank you for giving representation to the LGBTQ plus community, and they are disappointed in Rick Foss's vote.
Typically with proclamations, we do post to the Facebook page. It just needs to go to Sarah Bowen, I think.
Yeah, I'll take care of that. That it be posted. Yep. Okay. Questions on the bond issues?
Okay, Mike, I've got one.
Yep.
What's in the equipment line for Public Works?
Oh, boy, I wish you hadn't asked that. But I know that Mark's on the phone. So Mark was proposing 2 years worth of equipment repairs replacement. So that's the 1,165,000. What I decided to do is just take the first year of his requests. So in that 585,000, Rick, if Mark is on the phone, he can just quickly tell us what those items are in the 585. You there, Mark?
If he's not there, Mike, what I would just say is that I
He's
assure.
on mute. He's on mute.
Okay, okay.
Mark, if you can hear us, you're on mute. Can someone else unmute him?
I think Mike has the ability.
Yeah,
I do?
Yeah.
Good
Sarah
Lord.
does. Whoever's
Sarah's the host.
control is.
Can you unmute him, Sarah?
Yes, I did one. I think he's on here twice.
Yeah, he's on there twice. I didn't get that.
So I unmuted one, and then the other one, it won't. I think he's unmuted.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Hey, Mark.
Okay, sorry about that.
The amount, or did you hear the question okay? Mark?
Could you repeat it one more time?
In the 585 number in the bond issue, Councilor Foss asked the items, and I couldn't remember them all, that comprise the 585. I know there was 2 trucks, I believe, in that total.
There's a wheeler dump sander plow unit.
Okay.
Heavy-duty four-wheel drive loader. A single axle dump plow sander. And a small utility skid steer loader. Of course, as Mike mentioned earlier, we had a 2-year proposal. And in that second year, there's some other items that may move up on the priority list. And with this amount of funding at 585, we'll have to reevaluate our priorities and what we're gonna need. So some of these items I just mentioned may get moved to the following period of bonding.
Once we get time, if the money is approved, once we get ready to order things, what you're saying, Mark, is in September, October, you'd reevaluate. Of course, you got to stay within the approved amount, but you'd reevaluate exactly which items at that time seem to be in the most need.
That's correct.
Hey, Mark, just to recap, last year we started to look at, your equipment and your maintenance and, the longevity in which you've maintained that equipment. And, there've been, a pretty decent gap in when we started to start replacing some of these things. Can you just kind of follow back up and just let folks know that, where you stand with that, because we tried to get back on track with this plan last year, and this, continuation of that, getting some of this equipment back up to date. And I don't recall seeing it, but I thought we spoke last time at the last meeting. You could put together, some of that older equipment, kind of like we did, almost last year. You kind of put together a document that showed us, what you had in service, how long it's been there, and then what the cost of, maintaining that vehicle was. I think that would be a very helpful exercise for, a lot of the, new councils, and just kind of review, that information.
Yes, I'm in the process of putting that together, and I've sent out a summary sheet to Mike to review.
Awesome. Good. Thank you.
And I'll share that with the finance committee, Mike, next time we talk.
Mike, can you scroll down to Parks and Rec?
Okay, Parks and Rec has one item. Well, there are 3 items, but the one item, the pool, I want to say that this is, at this point in time, seems like very, very good news, because at the beginning with the pool phase two renovation, the total estimated cost was 4.6 million. A lot of people had real concerns and heartburn over that total. We reduced over the last few months that projected cost to 3.3. When we applied to the Alphon Foundation in September, we applied for 4.6 million. The foundation agreed to support our request at 2.3, half of what we asked for at that time. But we knew that 2.3 on our side was going to be very, very difficult. So we went to work with the engineer, reduced the scope of the work and a bunch of other things to get the total project costs estimated at 3.3. The question then became, will the Alphon Foundation stay with its original commitment of 2.3, which leaves us with furnishing the remaining 1 million? I spoke with them yesterday, and although they couldn't give me a final commitment because they do have to go back to their board because the project has changed. But I was told that there is hope. There is definitely hope for the foundation to remain at its original commitment. We are going to have to wait for that final word. But I think it's encouraging news.
Is Matt still of the mindset to rework how we operate the pool to at least a break even, or maybe just a touch better with a small profit margin in there?
100%.
Oh, yes.
100%. Yeah, we had a good meeting today with Kim at the chamber and with Bobby Joe, our recreation coordinator. So I'm anxious. And Councilor Morris, you'll be interested, Councilor Smith and Oliveira. I'd like to share a version of the budget, of the budget plan with you guys as early as next week, so you guys can have a look at it. We have some other revenue streams that are real. It's not, that's why we've taken a little extra time. I want to be as sure as we can. We're also proposing to raise our rates because we're going to have a new pool. It's justifiable that our rates for both residents and non-residents will go up. So yes, to answer your question, yes.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Mike, I guess it's still up in the air about whether we get the grant, but if there is a yearly requirement that we take money out of our budget for that, correct?
Yes, the foundation's commitment to the city to provide 2.3 million came with a condition that we set aside $50,000 a year for future repairs. Obviously, we're not going to be able to do that this year. And we'll want to talk with them about the necessity for next year too. I mean, should we not get a full year in next year, then I would hope there'd be some consideration on their part to delay that. But we won't have to do that for this coming year.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable request that it only kick in once the pool is up and fully operating.
Right. So let me just end on the pool thing by saying that this Thursday, we get the bids in. And what we hope to do next Tuesday night is present a recommendation to you about who to hire. And it's absolutely critical that we get a contractor on board soon so they can start and so that this pool can be ready next June 15th. They told us early on, with the scope of everything that needs to be done, if you folks wait till September, October to start in the fall, we cannot guarantee you'll meet your opening date for next year. We need to start as soon as we can.
I'm just going to raise my concern that I raised at Finance Committee, which is if we're going to have to put away $50,000 a year, and again, I know Matt's working on a plan to present to us. I think before you vote on this, we should wait to see whatever plan is, to see what the financials are going to be based on the numbers that are presented. It's like when we talk about the need for extra police, or Sid bringing up the need for extra, maybe plow truck drivers. We don't keep up with the infrastructure we have. A lot of our infrastructure is in very bad shape, and that's really the number one priority of tax dollars. or at least one of, I shouldn't say the number one, but one of the main things that we're tasked to do is keep up with the infrastructure and help our sidewalks. A normal person, you know, in top shape could have a hard time walking down, and half people will just walk in the breakdown lane rather than walk on them. Certainly, nobody with a disability could, they're certainly not ADA compliant, if that, I guess, is a better way to put it. So when we think about infrastructure, I'm just going to ask that we start really thinking about what we can afford in the long term for the city when it comes to our infrastructure, and prioritizing that spending towards things that are the most important, because sometimes we just can't have it all. So Matt, I appreciate you making a plan. I hope to see something that's break even, because or at least at least close enough so that it's so minuscule. We're like, well, it's not a huge subsidy from the taxpayers to keep this pool going.
And Mike, can I piggyback on that?
I'm sorry, Sid. Let me say more, because it's like when we put in the slides, we did all this stuff, but it's like, are we just setting ourselves up for down the road, all of a sudden running into this wall again where, oh, geez, we got, $4 at that point, could be $5-6 million for this infrastructure. And who counted on that? Just keeping it in mind. I know that you all work very hard to do that, and you hear from your different constituencies. I just at least thought I'd put it on the radar that we need to start shifting how we think about some of these things.
Claude's had his hand up for quite a while.
Sorry, I can't see you all. I see Mike's screen, so.
No, me too.
I appreciate you that you can't see us all with the screen up. Two things. Number one, I just wonder, Mike Roy, if you're confident that the COVID-19 crisis will be over by next fall, by next summer. I don't think anybody knows that. Number two, this is the song I've been singing for the past several months. We don't know where we are in terms of our finances. It might be wise to go ahead and put this project back for a year and see if we can afford it then, instead of gambling that we can afford it now and ending up on the short end of the stick.
Let me address your first question first. I don't think anyone could say at this point in time they're confident what the case will be next June. So I can't say that. I have hope that it will be able to be used. But in regards to your second point, Council Frankie, I just have to remind you that we are at a point where interest rates are as low, I think, as low as they're possibly going to get. If we're going to borrow $1 million to fix something that I believe we need to be fixed, and if we have a $2.3 million commitment riding along with that, I think it would be a huge, huge mistake to delay this a full year, which means we wouldn't have a pool again next year, because there are some real concerns about being able to open the pool as it stands with the repairs that are needed.
Mm-hmm.
Sid?
Yeah, Mike, I just want to piggyback what the mayor was saying, because we had this at the finance meeting and stuff with this, looking at this bond. I know all the other councils are just seeing some of these numbers, which I appreciate that they study and analyze and take into account every single thing that's on here, and even after this meeting, obviously. But like I said, I do echo the mayor on the option for the 2.3 million of $50,000 a year. I think that's, in my opinion, it's unsustainable. As you know, infrastructure is the most important thing to the taxpayer. Like he said, the roads, the sidewalks are in such disrepair all across the city. And I hear that from my constituents first and foremost. And when you have those kinds of roads existing even in the most affluent neighborhoods, and you're hearing from that, I can't imagine, down in, Eric's part of the woods with the South End, and even some Ward 6 streets that I know of. There's infrastructure work that needs to be done everywhere. And then we're all having the broad discussion. And even for somebody like Matt Skehan, who has charge of this area, some of this money could be allocated to the equipment that he sorely needs, and certainly the shared position that he sorely needs. This is where the priorities really have to come into play, that we really have to think about. There are just some things that were stretched so thin, and one of the vacuums seems to be, in my opinion, in my 6 years on the Waterville City Council, the vacuum has been the pool. And that's where the allocation of our money has not a whirl hurricane of dividends coming in from there. So yeah, I understand the aging infrastructure of the pool and some of the benefits it does have, but again, we have to listen to our constituency and what they're complaining to us most about, and that's got to be relevant in our minds as we look at this.
Before we go much further, I just want to let everyone know we have lost the stream completely. And so given the fact that the meeting has gone on as long as it has and nobody can hear anything we're saying right now, perhaps we should adjourn until the next meeting and then restart this discussion.
Second the motion.
Yeah.
And then all I want to say is that I talked to Mike about this today. I'm hoping we can get back to in-person meetings next week for all those who are comfortable, so that we don't continue to deal with these kind of issues. And as we're getting into the bond stuff and the budget stuff, it's important that the public be there and be able to ask questions. And it's a lot easier in person than it is this way.
Well, I for one am not comfortable with group meetings at this point. I would like to continue to be a member of the council remotely if we can set that up.
And so, yeah, I would like to continue that.
I would agree.
Go ahead, Mike.
We talked today about how it would be possible, and we don't think it can be possible, to have some people physically present in a room, other counselors, a number of them on a Zoom call where you can be seen and heard and participate. We couldn't understand how that can be done. So.
Well, we did that at the beginning of this crisis, right? We just had to meet in the room in Fairfield because they were all set up for that. Is that possible?
I don't think so. No. We met with our IT people today to talk about it.
Let's continue that discussion, and because we need to figure this out. Like, this is not this.
Well, I agree. Difficult to handle questions in this format.
Mike, I was home, and you, Patty, and I believe Nick were at Fairfield.
Yeah, I was there too.
As a split.
So I was
home watching.
I was with Mike and them.
Yep.
So you're just talking about an audio connection?
Nope. No, it's full video.
Right. We did this at least once in the beginning of the crisis where half of the council was at the room in Fairfield.
It was like the deck of the Starship Enterprise.
Yeah.
We had people on the screen.
Well, I mean, that's more of a conversation for Chad, though. Like, is that infrastructure of that ability only sits in Fairfield because that's what they have set up? Or is that something that we can bring to the technical center and do that?
And if we think this is going to continue, we need to figure that out. So perhaps we need to invest in some equipment and we need to build that into the budget.
Well, let me first ask, for people that would not attend, what would you be happy with? Just an audio connection or audio and video? Because the one you mentioned, Rick, you were not visible video-wise to us in the room.
Oh, okay. I could see you guys.
Yeah, we could. I remember that with the Fairfield meeting, we could see you.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, but we couldn't see you.
Oh, okay.
And I think the city could see us, right? All of the constituents could see us.
I think so. So I agree with Eric. Let's continue to talk about it, but maybe for next meeting, we could continue one more Zoom one and then have it an item on the agenda to talk about the next step, half in present, half Zoom.
Let's make that happen, Mike. If you need somebody to officially say it, I'll say it.
Second it.
Yeah, that would give us two full weeks to kind of figure it out for the July 7th meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we'll do Zoom meeting next Tuesday night, and work on trying to set something up where people can be comfortable, whether they're here or there.
Yep.
Thank
Good.
you.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night.